Hey guys, hope everybody's doing good. Coming back with another video. Um, okay, so in the 90s, going up to the 2000s, uh, the meth trade here in America was dominated by biker gangs, right? They're the ones that mainly moved it. Um, that's just to get it out there. Methamphetamine is definitely a white people drug, right? Those dudes are the only ones who could love drugs so much to make some crazy thing like that, right? You have to, you get the ephedrine pill. You have to clean it out in another, soak it in something pure. Get all the impurities out. You have to cook it by mixing it with other chemicals. Then you have to pull it out and spray some Freon on it to get it to cool down really fast. It's this whole process. Back in the day, I met a few cooks, and they would kind of talk about it a little bit. It always seemed something absolutely insane. Um, I was always of the belief that only white folks could come up with something like that. They're just really creative when it comes to a lot of things, and drugs especially, right? Because um, when weed was a Mexican thing, there was only about 4, 5 different kinds um, of weed that was grown out in Mexico. It became legal here in the United States, and right now, if you go into a weed shop, there's sativas, indicas, hybrids, all these things. Like I'll go in there and I'll just be like, oh my god, what did these guys do? It's cool, but at the same time, it's just it just shows their creativity when it comes to things like that. Um, so it was basically the white bikers who controlled the meth. They began to mix with a lot of Mexicans, as at least here in the West Coast, the Mexicans in the 90s began to dominate the cocaine trade. They basically took it from the Colombians, and basically Mexicans ever since like the early 2000s became the kings of cocaine, and pretty much to this day they still are, right? Um, so they began to do business with them, even though you could say, hey, a lot of bikers, they rock swastikas. They tend to not be too open to other groups. You'd be surprised how, when it comes to making money, you'd be surprised how quickly people will get over things like, colorism or racism and stuff. You'd be surprised at how quick all of a sudden they love you. And so they began to interact, right? They began to buy a lot of blow off the Mexican dudes. Um, Eventually, what happened is that the DEA and the American government put pressure on the American companies to get a hold of selling big amounts of ephedrine. They put pressure on the Canadian border because a lot of ephedrine was also coming from Canada. They put pressure there, and so a lot of it stopped coming through. And like I said, I'm from the state of Washington, so I was privy to a lot of these things that I would because I would hang around people who knew about it. Um, they put pressure on everybody, and so a lot of meth couldn't be cooked up. It could still be get in small quantities, but they couldn't take care of the big quantities, right? And so the bikers kind of just asked themselves, well, who could possibly how do we fix this? And they basically said, well, maybe the Mexicans can handle it. What happened is that up here in the West Coast, up the state of California and the state of all the way up to Washington State and Montana, a lot of people from the state of Michoacán came here, right? It's where my family's from. It's where I was born. For whatever reason, you'll have the other groups tend to stay near the border. So you'll have some of them in like L.A. but a lot of like people from Sinaloa or from Sonora went to Phoenix, Arizona. You know, the people from Chihuahua or Tamaulipas tend to stay in Texas, right? But a lot of people from Michoacán came up here to the state of Washington, and so what happened is when the bikers would interact with these dudes, they would be interacting with a lot of people from Michoacán, and they basically asked them. They basically said, "Hey, can you guys get ephedrine down there, down in Mexico?" And it turns up that they could. It turns up that they could, and so they said, "Okay, we're gonna teach you guys how to cook it." So a lot of people, a lot of the main people who learned how to cook it, all ended up being from Michoacan. The ones who learned firsthand from the original cooks who were really really good at it. And so in the 2000s, what you would have is there were groups of people who had a lot more contacts, right? A lot more contacts. A lot of dudes, a lot of these Mexican dudes were moving a lot of blow, so they had bigger contacts than the bikers had, and they were able to bring large amounts of ephedrine into the United States. Right in those days, they would smuggle ephedrine into the United States. They wouldn't smuggle meth; they would smuggle ephedrine in. Right? They would send it in boats. They would do all these things to get it in here, and they would cook it here. They would set up, decent sized labs, and what they would do is they would together a group of people, right? They would invest, get a nice decent amount of ephedrine together, and then get they would go out to a ranch somewhere, right? A farm. They would get together a few guys, all who happened to be from Michoacan, right? That was universally known across, Mexican groups, is that if you wanted the best product, you get the cooks from Michoacan because those are the best cooks to make the meth, right? And so that's what they would do. They would get together about anywhere from 5 to 10 of them. They would basically tell them, "Hey, we're gonna cook this shit. You guys are gonna make 15, 20,000. When it's all done, we're gonna sit here all weekend and we're gonna cook up 50 to 100 pounds of this. But in one weekend, in 2 days, I'm gonna pay you guys 15, 20 grand, right?" Hey, that's a lot of money, and so that's what they would do. Little by little, what happened is that America started, putting pressure on the border so that the ephedrine couldn't get through anymore. And so basically, these people ended up the also the farms. A lot of people ended up getting arrested. A lot of the cooks would get arrested. A lot of all they took down entire groups of people, right? Because it was the meth cooking was centered in Washington and in California. Um, as these people would get deported, or as they would start getting raided, and then these dudes would take off back down to Mexico under, knowing that they had warrants out for their arrest, they began to cook it down there, right? As because there was still the demand for it, and it's still the demand still needed to get filled, right? These dudes, the clients needed the drugs, and these people themselves were all they liked the money that comes with it, and so nobody was willing to let go of any of that. And so they just started cooking down there, and they quickly realized, hey, with the amount of money that we have, we can just, pay off the government and not have them bother us at all. And so that gave rise to the super labs that are down there, right? Labs that here in America, they were smaller labs because they would need to be set up over the weekend, and then once it was over, they would break everything down and move it to a different place. In Mexico, you didn't need to do that. You set up lab once and cook for like months at a time, right? Nothing, like the only thing that would ever ruin it is like if an explosion or a fire took place, which sometimes does happen, right? When you don't cook it right, it can just explode. And so it gave rise to the super labs, and then they started cooking it down there. These guys, they made with all the money and the contacts that they had, they slowly Mexico, the United States, is always right. They put pressure on Mexico so that Mexico wouldn't sell large amounts of ephedrine, right? because Mexico used to. America put pressure on them, so Mexico kind of cut off the flow of it. Mexico turned to Asia, and huge amounts of it were coming through, just enormous amounts, right? They didn't. This kind of caught the DEA off guard a little bit, right? Um, because I think and especially a lot of local police were kind of late to the party in a sense where they didn't think that, a lot of the bikers and the Asians and the Hispanics, Mexicans, specifically, would ever put their differences aside to work together when it came to the meth trade and the cocaine trade and all that stuff. So they were actually late to it. By the time they caught on, they I was watching one time a show um, of the DEA, right? And they were like poking fun at the bikers. They were just like, they were talking about an arrest that they made where the bikers were selling meth that they had bought off Mexicans that was coming from Mexico. And the bikers, they didn't want to talk, but they ended up figuring it out eventually. And they were like poking fun. They were like, these dudes, they got swastikas on them, but they interact almost daily with Mexicans. Asians too, right? Asians, they don't necessarily, they kind of stick to themselves. The ones like from San Francisco and stuff like that, and so it also caught them off guard that the Asians were so welcoming to buy crystal meth off Mexicans, and that was the thing, right? Is that um they didn't expect that for the sake of money, pretty much everybody is willing to always put their differences aside, but that's just the way it works, right? Um, when it comes to making money, it doesn't really matter what skin color you are or anything like they get it in, and so the government, especially local police, were kind of caught off guard when it came to that whole thing. Uh, I was watching a documentary once about down by Michoacán, and it was talking about that the DEA couldn't figure out where all the meth was coming from, right? But there was very, very good meth going around. Um, and one day, what happened was that there was a storm going on in Mexico, and an airplane that was headed from one of the Asian countries into Mexico ended up not being able to go into Mexico because of the storm. So they landed in Florida, I believe. They made a pit stop. They're like, we got to refuel, and then once the storm is over, we'll go. Well, what happened is that customs got onto the airplane anyways. They're like, okay, well, even if it's not gonna stop here, we're still gonna check it out just real quickly to see everything's, whatever it is on American land. They got in and saw a bunch of boxes in there. I believe it was a freight, a mail airplane. They found giant boxes in there that when they opened them up, they were spilling out with ephedrine. And they basically, I believe, they still let it go, right? Just so they wouldn't know that they were onto them. But basically, they got the name of the company that was doing it and everything, and they traced it to where it was going. But that one weird mistake is how they basically figured out that that one of the Asian countries was doing a lot of business with Mexico in the whole methamphetamine trade. They basically they shut down the line, right? They didn't even really necessarily go after the dudes in Mexico. They went after the Asian company that was selling the ephedrine, and basically they put pressure on China. China shut the company down, or at least they didn't shut it down, but they put enough pressure that they wouldn't just sell it like that anymore. And the whole line, they just shut the whole group down because the group couldn't get it from Asia anymore, right? They most likely looked for a different company or whatever, but um, basically what the thing about meth is that it's not like other drugs. where like no matter what, it's addicting. Meth, the purer it gets, the more addicting it is because the more euphoria it gives you when you get high with it, right? So in times, what the DEA realized was that watching, people who get arrested or people who go into rehab in times of large spikes of addiction, it meant that somebody had really, really good meth coming in, right? And then when they would shut the plug down, they would see that addiction rates would go down because the good meth was gone. And then so they would that's how basically they would watch it, is they would keep an eye on it, to basically just monitor the addiction rates. And then when the addiction rate would spike again, they would know, hey, it's time to get to work and find out who this new connect is, because somebody is getting really good stuff right now. Basically, they did a good job. They did a good job. You got to give it to you got to give that to them, because they shut down uh, pretty much all of the good lines. Um, right now, meth addiction rates are at an all-time low, just because you can't really get a hold of ephedrine anymore, ever, right? I believe they moved on to like synthetic options, not ephedrine. It's like a synthetic version of it, which is easier to get, but it's not as potent, and so it's the stuff just isn't as good. And because it's not as good, people don't get addicted to it as easily, right? And so yeah, that's basically the thing that happened with meth. Um, the main thing behind the story being is that because a lot of these dudes were from Michoacán, the cooks, is that when they went back down into Mexico, they all went to Michoacán, and so Michoacán basically became the the state with the most meth cooks, the place where everybody would get it, right? Anybody who wanted meth in those days would just go down to Michoacan and basically buy it there wholesale, just shoot it up north and cross it over, right? That's where everybody got their start. But because there was such a high concentration of cooks there, a lot of people there ended up addicted to it, right? The people who were cooking it wouldn't wear masks, they wouldn't do any of that, so they slowly became addicted to it too. And so everybody was a lot of people were high on it, right? And so it became really easy. It was also really cheap, widely available. um so a lot of the soldiers, a lot of the dudes that were being recruited into the cartels would basically either already be addicted to it, or they would get them addicted to it afterwards. Basically, I believe that meth was, at least a crude version of it, was created by the Germans, right, during World War II, in an attempt to make super soldiers who never needed to sleep and didn't need very much rest, and wouldn't be too hungry all the time. The Germans kind of created a crude version of meth that over time was created, purified more, and it eventually turned into the crystal meth that we have today, is what I believe its history is. And in Mexico, that's exactly what they use it for, right? They use it to basically make super soldiers, people who are awake for days. They hardly ever need any sleep. They don't need very much food, and they're willing to do just about anything you ask them to, right? It doesn't matter how wild, how twisted it is. They'll do it. They'll do it because they're kind of out of their minds a lot of the time. They don't really have too much of a conscience when they're super high on it, right? And so yeah, so that was basically just the connection to make, to show that um what's happening is nobody's fault, because there's a lot of fingers get pointed, right, back and forth. um a lot of people in the US are like, man, the dudes down in Mexico, they just keep sending drugs, it doesn't stop. The dudes down in Mexico will be like, well, if you don't want drugs, why do you guys keep asking for them? Why do you ask for so much drugs? Why do you demand so much drugs, and then send us guns down here to to keep killing our people with? And it's just a way to show that both it's a problem on both sides of the border that needs to get taken care of, right? And I'm not entirely sure exactly how to do that, but both sides are kind of at fault, and it's just it's a product of the fact that we're neighbors, right? We're neighboring countries, and sometimes when one thing happens in one country, it has a ripple effect into the one that's next door, right? And one could argue, well, why don't things that happen in Mexico ripple downward? Well, it's because we don't trade so much and have so much to do with I believe it's Guatemala that borders us, but I'm not sure. Um, why we don't have an effect on them? It's just we don't really have much to do with them, right? We don't They're not major trade partners of ours. Nobody from Mexico is in a rush to go down and work in Guatemala, right? And so yeah, like that's just it's something that can't be avoided. It can't, because we are so in close proximity with each other that the two countries just um and Canada as well, right? Canada and America kind of the they just have to learn to get along, and the same thing with Mexico. Mexico and the United States just kind of have to get along, right? It's something that we're just gonna have to work towards, because neither group is growing anywhere, right? Neither group is gonna go anywhere. It's always gonna be there, and what we have to strive for is to get along, because, like I said, something as simple as a group of bikers um, getting together with some Mexican dudes and doing some business led to the huge meth boom that happened down in Mexico and all that. It's one little thing can have an enormous ripple effect that just changes everything, right, going forward. And that's basically what happened. Um, as far as like the fentanyl goes, we could get more into that, in another video. But as far as how the fentanyl thing is gonna get solved, it's it's gonna have to get solved on both sides, just like the meth one. But it's gonna involve putting a lot more pressure on China and on the Chinese companies to shut down the sales, right? Because as long as they keep doing it, it's still gonna be coming through. I remember before Mexico was involved in it, I would hear about it. I would hear about fentanyl. Um, I knew some dudes who would get it. They would basically get it directly from China. And these days, China didn't sell precursor chemicals to fentanyl. They would sell straight fentanyl, and they would send it through the mail, right? So these dudes that I would talk to, they were pretty much all white dudes. They they would just be like, yeah, you get a house that's abandoned, but it still has a post office in the front, and then you put an order. You spend $100, $200, and they'll send you like it was super cheap in those days. It was like they'll send you like a kilo of pure fentanyl through the mail, and sometimes it would get confiscated. It wouldn't make it through, but even if the DEA or whoever caught it, um, it was an abandoned house, right? So nobody would get caught. They could sit on the house all they wanted. It was abandoned anyways. When when they put a little bit of pressure on the post office, or whatever these companies were that were getting it through, they moved to Canada. A lot of fentanyl was pouring into Canada from China also, and it took the United States a little bit to kind of clamp down on the fentanyl coming from China, because it used to be a lot more. Nowadays, I think it's they stemmed the flow a little bit, Not necessarily because of anything they did, but because Mexico got involved and basically said, you know what, we can, same way we did with meth labs, we could do it with, these labs. We could just, cook a huge amount of it up and just start sending it up like that. And so yeah, I think, me personally, that it's gonna take something like what they did with the meth, to put pressure on the Chinese companies to stop sending it, to be able to stem the flow of fentanyl down, right? Just because there's so much demand for it. Um, and also, as far as here in the U.S. is concerned, what I would say is decriminalizing it is not an answer, right? That's just not a way to do things. A lot of cities have decriminalized it, thinking that that would make things better, and as we've all seen, all it did was make things worse. And that's pretty much decriminalizing anything just makes things a lot worse. It doesn't make things better. I don't think it ever has. Um, I have I have a few cousins, right? Who having grown up here in America, they did the whole gang banging thing. They like to get high. They did all these things, and what I can say, from being around their parents, or even people that you happen to be around working with or whatever, um, that you hear them, just whatever, start conversations and start talking about their kids or whatever. Um, it's always, hey, I just got a phone call. My son's locked up again. Oh man, that sucks. No, no, no. It's all good. I haven't heard from him in 3 months. I wasn't even sure if he was alive. He's off, with his friends and getting high and stuff like that. Are you gonna bail him out? Yeah, he called me to ask for bail, but nah, he's good right there where he's at. Right there in county jail is where I want him, because at least in there I know he's getting fed, and I know he's not completely safe, of course, right? Anybody who's been to county jail or prison can tell you that, but he's safer than he would be if he were out in the streets getting high, or involved in a gang shooting, or and stuff like that. The parents, at least the ones that I know, that I've been around, they actually breathe a sigh of relief when they find out that their sons, um, are in jail, because at least that way they know exactly where they are, and that they're alive, right? And I just wanted to get that out there, just to give the point of view, not just necessarily just mine, but the point of view that I've seen from a lot of parents who just are also in agreement that decriminalizing, um, drug use and stuff like that just isn't. It doesn't seem to be the answer that a lot of cities were hoping that it would be. And the only ones who don't want to, don't I feel like the only ones who should technically be fighting for that, the decriminalization of drugs, and or should be the junkies, right? Because those dudes never want to be in jail. Those dudes, the longer they're in jail, the more they're hurting, the more they're going through withdrawals. They're the only ones who shouldn't want to be in jail. Everybody else technically should want them to be in there so they could get the help that they need. And that, I think, they don't necessarily always change. A lot of people, they get locked up, they get clean, and then when they get out, they keep on going. They just get high again. But at least they have that option, right? They have the option of, hey, you know what? I'm clean. I'm gonna stay clean. Or you know what? I'm clean, but I feel like I just want to keep getting high. They have the option of deciding, right? Compared to if they never did get locked up, they wouldn't have the option to stay clean, right? Because they never got locked up. They were never forced to detox and get clean. Um, so yeah, we'll cut this video right here, and hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Um, Remember to comment, like, subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.